Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cyber Advantage 2026, Week 5. This is Dr. Rhonda Farrell, the founder of CSTGIA, bringing you from endurance to institutional control, how governance turns good decisions into repeatable advantage. Our theme today is about endurance without institutionalization is fragile. So, why endurance alone is not enough? Because in week 4, we focused on decision endurance, the ability to maintain clarity, control, and coherence under prolonged pressure. This week, we confront the next reality because endurance at the individual or team level is not enough to sustain cyber advantage in 2026. If clarity lives only in leaders' heads, if governance exists only during crisis, and if decision discipline fades once pressure subsides, then advantage evaporates. So, week 5 is about institutional control, the moment where cyber advantage stops depending on people holding the line and starts living inside the organization itself. So, 6 months from now, someone in your organization will make the exact same mistake you fixed last quarter. Not because they're incompetent, not because they weren't paying attention, but because the lesson you learned, the clarity you fought for, the decision discipline you held under pressure never got locked in. It might have lived in your leader's head, in your team's memory, in the habits of people who might not be there tomorrow. And when leadership changes, when the pressure subsides, when the next crisis demands attention, the organization will forget. This is not a discipline problem. This is an institutionalization problem. And in 2026, this is where cyber advantage goes to die. Last week, we talked about decision endurance, the ability to maintain clarity and control under prolonged pressure. But the shift for week 5 is that endurance at the individual level is no longer enough. If clarity lives only in leaders' heads, if governance appears only during crisis, and if decision discipline fades the moment pressure lifts, well, then our advantage evaporates every single time. So here's what I'll show you today: a 4 anchors framework that transform fragile, leader-dependent endurance into durable, system-embedded control. So your cyber advantage survives leadership turnover, AI-driven disruption, regulatory scrutiny, and the gravitational pull of how we've always done it. So let's get into it. First thing we need to understand and talk about today is why organizations keep losing ground they've already won across government, defense, healthcare, critical infrastructure. Many organizations can now see risk clearly, decide faster, and hold decisions longer under pressure. And yet, 6 months later, the same failures reappear. Why? Because advantage is lost, not necessarily through direct attack, but through reversion. Reversion to informal authority, reversion to escalation loops, reversion to undocumented judgment, reversion to how we've always done it. I worked with an organization last year that had just navigated a significant incident. Response, textbook. Decision rights, crystal clear. Escalation, clean as a whistle. They contained the threat in hours, not days. Leadership was proud. The board was satisfied. Everyone moved on. However, 8 months later, a nearly identical incident occurred. But this time, the incident commander had rotated out. The decision authority matrix never documented. The risk acceptance threshold lived on in one senior leader's judgment. They spent the first 6 hours of that second incident renegotiating who could decide what, not because they lacked capable people, but because the organization had institutional amnesia. It forgot why the first response worked, and that is the cost of leader-dependent control. So here's the critical distinction for this week. Endurance is a leadership behavior. Institutional control is a governance system outcome. Organizations with cyber advantage do not rely on hero leaders to remember what worked before. They embed it in everything they do. And they do this through 4 deliberate anchors. Anchor 1, decision rights are codified. They're not buried in policy, not implied by a title, not renegotiated every time pressure rises. They're explicitly documented who decides what, advisory versus authoritative roles, and they override authority without ambiguity. When decision rights are stable, hesitation appears. Anchor 2, risk ownership is named and made durable. Enduring organizations do not let risk float. They assign clear risk owners, clear acceptance thresholds, clear review triggers. This is what prevents post-incident blame cycles. This is what preserves trust under scrutiny. Anchor 3, decision memory is preserved. One of the fastest ways to lose advantage is to forget why a decision was made. Capture the rationale, preserve the trade-offs considered, maintain traceability, especially for audit, and for leadership transition, and for reuse. Decision memory is how organizations learn without repeating pain. And lastly, anchor 4, governance is continuous, not episodic. In fragile organizations, governance appears only during crisis. In resilient ones, governance is light, ongoing, reinforcing, not obstructive in nature. This is how control survives leadership turnover, reorganizations, and sustained disruption. So these 4 anchors, decision rights codified, risk ownership named, decision memory preserved, governance made continuous, is the difference between organizations that win incidents and organizations that win decades. So now I want you to think about the most critical decision your organization had to make in the last 90 days. Maybe it was a risk acceptance. Maybe it was a vendor termination. Maybe it was an architecture change under pressure. Now that you have it in your mind, let's answer these three questions. Who ultimately made that decision? What trade-offs were considered as you were going down that decision path? And why was that particular decision chosen over the alternatives? If you can answer all three of those and point to where that rationale lives, you and your organization have decision memory. If you're reconstructing it from memory right now, or if you're thinking I'd have to ask someone, that decision is already at risk of being unmade. Because here's the truth about institutional control. Endurance wins the incidents, control wins the decade. So say it with me. Endurance wins the incidents, control wins the decade. And that is the line between organizations that survive disruption and organizations that remain governable after the disruption ends. So let me bring this all together today. We started with the hard truth that 6 months from now, someone in your organization might repeat a mistake you already fixed, not from incompetence, but from institutional amnesia. The solution, again, is not more heroic leadership. It's not about holding the line harder. It's about building anchors that hold the line for you and your organization. Decision rights codified so hesitation disappears. Risk ownership named so accountability survives scrutiny. Decision memory preserved so lessons compound instead of vanish. And governance continuity so control outlasts any single leader. So here's what I'm asking you to do this day and this next week. Audit one decision you've made, one high stakes decision that was made in the last 90 days. Document who decided it, what trade-offs were considered, and why that choice was made. Share that artifact with your team or your governance forum by the end of the week. Make one decision completely traceable. That's it. One decision anchored. Because when regulators ask, when boards ask, when your successor asks, why did you decide that? You can point to your documented rationale, preserved trade-offs, clear ownership, proof that success wasn't luck. It was governed capability. So I know the weight you're carrying. You're navigating AI acceleration, regulatory compliance, workforce churn, and threats that don't wait for your organization to be ready. You're expected to move fast and maintain trust, to innovate and protect, to lead and document. The tension is real, and the world doesn't take that lightly, that you're here today, now, working to get this right. I believe governance is not a brake. It's the hard drive that saves your progress. And the work you do this week, anchoring even one decision, is how advantage stops depending on heroes and starts living in your systems. So next week, we move from institutional control to strategic leverage, because once governance is stable, cyber risk no longer limits action. It ultimately enables choice. But that's for week 6. For now, remember this. Cyber advantage is not proven in the moment of pressure. It's proven in what remains stable after the pressure lifts. Endurance wins the incidents. Control wins the decades. Again, this is Dr. Rhonda Farrell, the founder of CSTGIA, bringing you week 5 of Cyber Advantage 2026, from endurance to institutional control, how governance turns good decisions into repeatable advantage.